On November 5th, 1975, a crew of 7 lumberjacks had just finished a hard day's work clearing an area of trees inside Sitgreaves National Forest, Arizona. As they started to drive out of the forest in their truck, one of the crew members noticed a bright light through the trees in the distance. Out of curiosity, the crew decided to get a closer look at the object. What happened next would change their lives forever, but in particular, one crew member would experience one of the most documented cases of alleged alien abduction in history. That man's name is Travis Waltons, and this is his story. Before we deep dive into the story, please tap the like button, hit the notification bell, and subscribe to this channel for a feast of grim and grisly content. This story may be very distressing to some, so viewer discretion is advised. I am your host, Severed Soul. Travis Waltons was born on 10th of February in Arizona, USA. Travis grew up in Phoenix before moving to Payson, then on to Snowflake, where he still resides to this day. As a child, Travis had a keen interest in sports, specifically martial arts and boxing. In 1975, 22-year-old Travis Waltons had developed a reputation for being a bit of a rogue in his hometown of Snowflake, Arizona. As already mentioned, he was interested in boxing and could often be seen or heard riding around town on his Harley-Davidson motorbike. There was once a story told about Travis where he was driving through the woods with his friends in a car when all of a sudden a bear appeared from out of the trees. The bear stood in the middle of the road having a face-off with Travis and his companions. Travis, without any hesitation, jumped out of the car and chased the bear into the woods, earning himself hero status amongst his friends. As an adult, Travis started working with a crew of loggers, which included Travis, Mike Rogers, John Goulet, Steve Pierce, Dwayne Smith, and Alan Dallas. The crew didn't have access to expensive equipment or massive machinery. Instead, they relied on chainsaws, bow saws, axes, and good old-fashioned hard work. It was very high-risk, dangerous work, and as contractors, the crew had to work very quickly and efficiently in order to make a living. Mike Rogers, who was the foreman of the crew, was given the go-ahead on a huge contract to clear out a 1,200-acre plot of land inside Sitgreaves National Forest. The task at hand was monumental, given the sheer size of the area, the basic tools at their disposal, and such a small crew. After a few days of long hours and hardly any breaks, the crew was exhausted and already falling behind schedule. On November 5th, 1975, after a day of incredibly hard, grueling work, Rogers, Walton, and the rest of the crew loaded their equipment back onto the truck and made their way back to Snowflake. It was dusk, and darkness was beginning to fall on the area. Completely exhausted from the day's graft, the crew were talking amongst themselves in the truck when one of them looked off to the right and spotted an illuminated disc-shaped object through the trees in the distance. At this point, all of the men could see the light, and they started to speculate about what it could be. One of the men suggested that it could be the moon, partly hidden behind the trees. However, one of the other men dismissed this claim, pointing out that he could see the moon in the opposite direction. They speculated that it could possibly be a forest fire, but Rogers very quickly alluded to the fact that there was no smoke visible. They continued towards the object until they were roughly 100 feet away. At this point, the men could clearly see that the object was saucer-shaped. After a heated debate about how they should approach the situation, the men finally decided to drive down a small access road which would lead them straight to the object. They decided they'd get a bit closer, take a look, and then be on their way. When they got close enough, Travis Walton decided to exit the truck to get a better look at the object. As he approached, he could see that the object was hovering, motionless, 50 to 100 feet off the ground, with panels of lights on the underside. Curious and completely dumbfounded by what he was looking at, Walton apprehensively walked closer and closer to the object. With an ominous feeling about the situation, the rest of the crew were urging Walton to stop and come back to the truck. Walton's curiosity got the better of him as he slowly edged closer and closer to this thing. Walton said that he could vaguely hear the crew screaming for him to come back to the truck. But he was mesmerized, completely in awe at the beauty of this incredible piece of engineering. Silently hovering in the air, defying all laws of physics as we know them. Beautiful lights decorated the underside of the craft, which had Walton in an almost trance-like state. Without warning, the craft started to spin, emitting a mechanical, whirring-like sound, which grew louder and louder by the second. Shocked back to his senses, Walton said he immediately knew that he needed to turn around and get back to the truck as quickly as possible. However, before he had a chance to turn, a bluish-green beam of light was emitted from the craft like a bolt of lightning, striking Walton in the chest, sending him flying 20 feet or so from where he was standing. Fearing for their own lives and presuming that Walton was dead, Mike Rogers and the rest of the crew fled from the scene as quickly as they possibly could, before even having a chance to process what it was that they'd just witnessed. With his conscience and curiosity getting the better of him, Mike screeched the truck to an abrupt halt and doubled back to go and help his colleague. Just minutes after fleeing from the scene, the crew arrived back at the spot where Walton was left laying in the dirt. First thing that struck the men was that there was absolutely no sign of the saucer-shaped craft that had targeted Walton only moments ago. A second, and somewhat more concerning thing that caught their attention, was that there was also no sign of Travis Walton. The men spent several minutes searching the area and calling his name, but Travis Walton was nowhere to be seen. He was gone, seemingly vanished into thin air. Overcome with feelings of fear and regret, the men got back into the truck and made their way to the local town. On the way back to town, Mike spotted a payphone and suggested that they call the local sheriff's office. Ben Peterson, one of Walton's co-workers, was the most composed of all of the men at this point, so he picked up the phone and proceeded to explain as best as he possibly could exactly what they'd just witnessed to the local sheriff. Mike and his men absolutely expected to be met with a degree of skepticism when they tried to explain to authorities that one of their co-workers had just been abducted by aliens. In an attempt to prove that the men were lying, Sheriff Marlon Gillespie and his partner, Deputy Ken Copland, escorted the men back to the area of the supposed abduction to conduct a thorough search. They were accompanied by search groups with search dogs, but there was still no sign of Travis Walton anywhere. And so the sheriff decided to search the truck to make sure that the men weren't intoxicated or under the influence of any other substances. The truck search turned up nothing of concern, and so the sheriff decided to follow up by conducting field tests on the men to make sure that they were all sober. Which they were. The sheriff would even say to Mike and his crew, "If you tell us where you've hidden Travis Walton's body, we'll take it easy on you. We know you've done something, so you might as well come clean now." Sheriff Gillespie and Sheriff Copland were both very skeptical. However, they both agreed that all 6 of the crew members appeared to be very shaken up by whatever it was that they just witnessed. For the next few days, all 6 of Walton's co-workers were being accused of his murder. The crew were very worried about Travis, but they were also very concerned about what this all meant for them. They knew that unless Travis Walton's body was found, or by some miracle they could prove that they were telling the truth, they were going to face serious repercussions. Despite this, they all stuck to their story, and each of the men's recollection of the events remained consistent with the next. On the first day of the search, Mike Rogers noticed 3 men wearing red jackets, each carrying tools similar to metal detectors, scanning the ground. Rogers was under the impression that these men were some kind of paranormal investigators, and they'd arrived on site to find some evidence to support the crew's claims, or at least that's what he hoped. Mike approached the 3 men to ask them what they were doing, and they told him they were testing the area for radiation. Sensing an opportunity, Mike asked the men if they could use their equipment to scan the crew members' clothes for radiation, as they were fairly close to the craft when it attacked Travis Walton. So the men agreed. They tested the clothes that the crew members were wearing, but the results were negative. No radiation was detected at all. Initially, feeling quite dejected, Rogers then realised that after they'd made the call to the sheriff's office, all of the men had gone back home to get washed and changed before coming back to the site. This wasn't great news, as it meant that none of the men had anything on them to get tested for radiation. That was until Mike remembered that all of the men were wearing safety equipment at the time, and all of their safety helmets were still in the back of the truck. So Mike Rogers walked over to the truck, opened the door, and pulled out the safety helmets from the back. He placed them down on the floor, ready for one of the agents to scan them for radiation. The agent hovered the equipment over the helmets and began the test. The agent operating the machinery was completely shocked. He signalled over for his co-workers to come and take a look at what he could see. The needle on the scale of the meter was reading maximum radiation. The other 2 agents also scanned the helmets with their equipment, and the results were unanimous. Mike felt both relieved and optimistic that this was some kind of proof that he and his men were telling the truth. He turned around to speak to the agents, but the 3 men abruptly collected their equipment and walked away without saying a word. Mike tried to call them back, but they just carried on, got in their vehicles, and left the scene. Eager to find out what was going on, Mike approached Sheriff Gillespie to ask who the men conducting the radiation tests in the redcoats were. Sheriff Gillespie was obviously confused and unaware that anyone had been given authorization to conduct any radiation tests. He insisted that nobody should have been present at the scene without his say-so. Nobody knew who these 3 men in the redcoats were, and nobody could locate them once they'd left. Search for Travis Walton went on for a few days, but all efforts to locate him were in vain. The feeling around the local community was that the crew had done something to Travis Walton and were using this UFO story as some sort of distraction from the truth. It was seen as nothing more than an elaborate hoax. The story was gaining media attention worldwide. Nobody believed the crew's claims. Media outlets from far and wide were being deployed to Snowflake, Arizona, and the sheriff's office was becoming inundated with requests for more information regarding the Travis Walton case. Both Sheriff Gillespie and Sheriff Copeland were becoming more and more frustrated, feeling like they were being taken for fools by Mike Rogers and his crew. This is when the decision was made to put the crew to the test via a series of lie detector polygraph tests. So, they commissioned one of America's most experienced polygraph examiners, Cy Gilson, to conduct the tests. On November 10th, one by one, each of the crew members had the test administered on them for 2 hours. Wilson asked all of the crew members the same questions. They were all being interrogated and questioned as though they were guilty, as though they had something to do with the disappearance of Travis Walton. One of the 6 tests came back inconclusive. Alan Dallas had experienced personal issues with Travis Walton in the past and was deemed less cooperative than the other 5 crew members. This doesn't mean he was guilty or that there was foul play involved. He was certainly less forthcoming with his answers. However, All 5 of the other test results came back, showing that the subjects were telling the truth. Cy Gilson claimed the 92 to 98% success results with his polygraph tests. He said it would be highly unlikely someone could lie on his tests and get away with it. It would be practically impossible for 5 people to fool his tests. When Sheriff Gillespie received the test results, he was in shock, as he fully expected to receive 6 failed test results, and then they could get on with finding Travis Walton's body. The sheriffs were at a loss and didn't know which way to turn next. That was until something happened that had the sheriffs, the crew members, and Snowflake, Arizona in a state of shock. 5 days after the supposed alien abduction of Travis Walton, Dwayne Walton, Travis's brother, received a phone call. When Dwayne answered the phone, he heard a very familiar voice on the other end. Dwayne looked like he'd seen a ghost as he heard his brother speak to him through the phone. Before he could make any sense of what Travis was saying, Travis collapsed and the phone fell silent. Dwayne and his brother-in-law managed to locate the payphone that Travis had called from, and there he was, laying by the side of the road. When Travis woke up, Dwayne tried to ask him what had happened, but Travis could hardly talk. He couldn't believe that it had been 5 days. Dwayne rushed Travis straight to hospital, where he would be examined by Dr. Howard Kandel. Travis was malnourished and appeared totally dazed, and Dr. Kandel would report that his behaviour was consistent with somebody that had experienced a traumatic event. Dr. Kandel ran a series of tests on Travis, including blood work, to check for any difference in blood chemistry, including substance abuse. He also checked for signs of trauma or exposure, but the only signs of trauma that he could find was an injection site on Travis's arm. It would turn out that the puncture wound was not related to substance abuse, as the test for drug use returned negative results. Sheriff Gillespie was already waiting for Travis upon his return home. He wanted to be the first person to interview Travis. Travis was obviously exhausted and in no condition to be interviewed, but he tried to relay as much information as he possibly could. Sheriff Gillespie reported that Travis genuinely looked like he was in a state of shock. He didn't look like he was acting at all. When media outlets turned up at Travis's home, Dwayne tried to cover for him, telling them that Travis was at a hospital in Tucson. The National Enquirer approached Travis for permission to conduct an interview with him. In return, they offered to pay for testing to see what, if anything, had been done to Travis. With no concept of the ramifications of cooperating with the Enquirer, Travis accepted the offer and was taken to a local hotel for talks. He couldn't remember anything at first, but after having some time to reflect on the incident, Travis gave a detailed account of exactly what had happened to him. He said there was an overwhelming pain. It was hot and humid, and he was struggling to breathe. Travis said he could see a curved object over his chest, and he could hear movement all around him. He could just about make out people in lab coats surrounding him, and he presumed that the crew had taken him to hospital. Once Travis's vision began to clear, it dawned on him that the doctors in lab coats weren't human at all. In a panic, Travis lashed out, and the curved object fell from his chest as he managed to muster enough strength to stand up straight. As Travis stood up, he could see 3 small humanoid beings who appeared totally unemotional but very intelligent. Beings began to approach Travis, who armed himself with the nearest, largest object he could find, in an attempt to fight his way out of the situation. He said he tried to strike out at the nearest one to him, but he could barely move his arm. He managed to push the being away and was surprised at how soft and light it felt as it stumbled backwards into one of its companions. He claimed that he backed away, then bumped up against something, Then, as he looked around him, he noticed an array of tools and instruments. The beings halted their approach, then stopped and stared at Travis. A stare that Travis would later say haunted his nightmares for years following the abduction. He said he managed to escape through an open door, which led to a narrow passageway, then to another room with a control panel in it. What Travis presumes was a human being in a helmet and spacesuit, then took Travis by the arm back down the corridor. He led him through a military-style aircraft hangar, then into another room where Travis was placed on a table. Travis pleaded with the man for help, but the man seemed to have a totally emotionless, vacant expression on his face, and he didn't utter a single word. There were another 3 people in this room, all with the same vacant expression on their faces. Before he knew it, Travis had a gas mask placed on his face, which rendered him unconscious within seconds. The next thing he remembered, he was waking up on the floor, next to that payphone by the side of the road in Arizona. Following the events of the alleged abduction of Travis Walton, he went on to create a film called Fire in the Sky based on what had happened to him, and then a book of the same name. Over the years, countless interviews have been conducted with Travis Walton and the rest of the crew, and their stories have always remained consistent. The story has drawn many skeptics, with people believing that Travis Walton had enough motive to fabricate such an elaborate hoax. Some even believe that Walton and Mike Rogers were in on the whole plan together. It's reported that Travis was experiencing financial difficulties at the time. It's interesting that the National Enquirer had offered a $100,000 cash prize for the best UFO story of the year. There's been insufficient evidence to either support or contradict the Travis Walton case. It remains entirely open to personal opinion. I'd love to hear your thoughts and opinions. Was Travis Walton the victim of a genuine alien abduction? Or was this one of the most convincing UFO-related hoaxes in history? Please discuss your thoughts in the comments section. If you haven't already, please subscribe to this channel. Thanks for watching. I've been your host, Severed Soul.